step by step. This is a live stream which will show you how to perform the Elise Trouw live looping hands-free method. And this is my first live stream with this kind of content, so it's here to hopefully share with you and help you to learn how to use Ableton and learn how to perform using the way that Elise Trouw does. So welcome in. My name's Oliver Gearing. It's really great to have you here on this live stream. I'm going to be doing a lot more of these, but this first one is going to be about us looking at Ableton Live, really getting to the depths of that and really understanding the technique. So what we're going to do is we're going to go step by step through Elise Trouw's technique. We're going to look at Ableton, as you can see here, and we'll get right into it. So if you're watching this live, definitely come and shout out down below in the comments where you're from. I'd love to see that, and it'd be great to say hi to everyone that's there when you come in. And if you're watching this on repeat or on catch up, then definitely write catch up crew down below. That'll make me laugh. So the next thing we need to understand is, why is Elise Trouw so good? So Elise Trouw is a multi-instrumentalist. You can see there she plays guitar, she plays drums, she plays keyboards, she sings really nicely. And what she does is all of those instruments flow into Ableton Live. And she uses Ableton Live to loop. So she loops all those instruments around, but unlike Ed Sheeran, she doesn't trigger those loops using a foot pedal or a button or something. All of it happens completely automatically. So it's really, really awesome. And for this to work, you need a special bit of software that's not just Ableton, as you can see here. You need a special little bit of software, and it's either the IAC driver, which I use on the Mac, or you have to get another bit of software called BOM MIDI Translator. So BOM MIDI Translator is what you'll need if you've got Windows. But just quickly saying out loud that I've got an offer code. So BOM MIDI Translator is also a really great piece of software. So we'll be getting into the depths of this as well. But definitely, if you fancy using this software, you can go to this webpage here and you can download a trial copy. It's a really good trial. I think it runs for 20 odd days. And you can really get to use it. And if you do choose you'd like to buy it, then you can use my code Oliver20 to get 20% off. Okay, so what I've done is I've created a diagram that I think will help you to see what is going on with this Elise Trouw method. So these are 8 specific steps which you can implement. I'll put back up in a second. These are steps that you can implement that will allow you to go from the beginning to end of this process, following me on this live stream. And by the end, you'll have a full understanding of exactly how you need to set up Ableton and get it working really, really well. So that is what we'll do. So we'll quickly, briefly run through them all. So the first one is inputs. So I will show you how to connect your keyboards, guitars, and microphones, and how to set up the tracks really efficiently. The second thing, number 2, is looper. This is an Ableton Live effect, which emulates a loop pedal. This is absolutely key to this technique. And I'll show you how to get it. I'll show you how to set up so you can use it really well. Number 3 is chain. For each of your instruments, I will show you how to set up a CPU efficient effects chain or a patch chain. This allows you to change the effect or change the instrument, like the piano, in real time. I'm not really sure if Elise actually uses this, but it's a super useful part of the system that I think you'll find really, really helpful. Number 4 is trigger. This is the MIDI triggering part. And I'll walk you through how to set that up in Ableton so you can kind of see how that works really well. Number 5, automate. This is the key magic sauce part of the process. And it uses the IAC driver for the Mac or the BOM software I already mentioned to automate your triggering to unlock the hands-free nature of the Elise Trouw method. Number 6, all the way over to the right, is the outputs. So I actually have 2 stereo outputs. The first stereo output is the performance output, and that goes to the audience. So if you're live streaming, that's where it will go. And the second output, the second stereo output, goes into my ears, into my in-ear monitoring. And that's really helpful. So you can hear something slightly different or have some cues or something, which is really helpful. Number 7 is cue. So this is one of my own steps, and I'll show you how to set up a really helpful cue track, which you can listen to while you play your music. And I think you'll find that really useful. It has things like lyric reminders, and it has the metronome playing in the background or the click playing in the background. So that's really helpful. And finally, 8, the dotted line vamp. That is actually a another one of my learns from having run this system for a while. So if you've ever been in a band and you've seen the lead singer do something like this to you, what he or she is trying to say to you is, I'm not ready to come back in yet. Please play around that bit of the song. So you might have finished the first chorus and he wants you to loop around, just play the same section over and over again. And he wants you to do that until he's ready, basically. So that's called vamping. And one of the things I've learned in this system is sometimes it can be quite tricky to stay on top of playing everything in the right order. So I've set up a system where I can vamp and I can press a button that tells the computer when I'm ready to play. You might find it helpful, but it's optional. So, what equipment do you need? So, I think as you can see on this slide, you're going to need instruments such as electric guitars and other audio instruments. So I use live electric guitars, live drums, electric guitars, electric bass, but you can do this with anything. I've seen people using violins or hand percussion, all really, really useful. You'll definitely need a keyboard, like a MIDI keyboard, and any other MIDI instruments that you're interested in having. And of course, you'll need to have any cables that you need to set up all those bits of gear. You need all those cables. You will also need Ableton Live. That's really, really important. There are 3 versions of Live: Intro, Standard, and Suite. So Suite is the most expensive. That's the one that I have. It has absolutely everything you can need. But intro version is pretty good. It's got the effect looper, but my guess is if you get the intro version, you may well pretty soon be wanting to upgrade it, but it's a good start if funds are limited. You also need a microphone, or 2 or 3. I started actually my setup using 3 microphones and was able to eventually kind of bring it down to 1, which is quite helpful. Ed Sheeran uses 2 microphones, so you need a couple of those. You will need a good pair of headphones or an in-ear monitoring system. You'll need a really good PC or Mac. So I use a MacBook Pro, really, really good, spec'd it up quite nicely, so it runs really well. It's what we're running on today, so that's pretty good. Finally, you'll need a really good audio interface. So this is the one at the bottom there in the little black kind of thing. That's my actual audio interface that I use. It's Behringer Euphoria UMC 1820, I think it is. So it's got 8 input audios and 10 outputs. So that's really useful. So now you know what we need. Let's get into the process. So we're now going to take a look at the inputs, the first part of the process. So this is inputs. So this is where it gets a bit interesting, I hope. And actually, we're going to start really mucking around in Ableton Live, and we're going to go through some specific steps in there, and I'll go through them relatively slow so you can see what's happening. But we'll be able to show you exactly what to do in Ableton to make it work. So let's move in there. Let's go to our Ableton. So as you can see here, I have Ableton Live open. Now, this is an absolutely brand new, session. So it's completely blank and there's nothing in there at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just move this around. I'm going to add in a, I'm going to now add in a MIDI track, and I'm going to add in an audio track, 2 brand new tracks. Actually, I'm going to delete these 2 here that I don't want to see. Okay, so for this system, what you need to have is you need to have 2 tracks. You need to have 2 tracks for every instrument. One second, let me just see. I think I've lost my. There it is. Okay. So you need 2 tracks for every instrument. This is really important. What's going on? You need 2 tracks for every instrument. So the first track here is the input track, and it could be a MIDI, it could be audio, but it doesn't really matter. This will be where the sound comes in, and the second track is your looper track, and this has to be audio. So I'm just going to quickly rename these. So I'm going to rename this to keys in, because it could be a keyboard in. And I'm now going to rename this to be keys looper. So 2 tracks, really, really important. So one of the things I think is really useful to do is you want to make sure that you choose what MIDI channel your instrument's going to be. So I've set the keyboard, you can see here behind here, I've set that keyboard to be channel 2. It's a relatively obvious thing to say, but you want to make sure that you don't have all your same MIDI instruments flowing through in the same, where is it there? You want to make sure you don't flow through all of the MIDI instruments through the same channel. So if you could put everything through channel 1, but then they'll have what's called crosstalk, and they'll go over each other. So ultimately try and have every instrument on a separate track. So this is MIDI channel 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to go to, it's MIDI input 3. Let's just check. That's right. So MIDI input 3, and rather than all channels, I'm going to choose channel 2. I'm going to change the monitor to in. So you can see that that's coming through nicely. And the important thing to say why I want to have monitor in is that means it will always sound. And then at the moment, I'm going to leave that with no output. So what we're going to do now, we're going to add in an instrument. So within my packed section, I've got a nice upright piano, Spitfire Music's piano. I do like this upright piano, it's quite nice. So I'm just going to scroll that down there, and I think that's coming through nicely. So I've set up a piano, and you can hear that it's working. Okay, so this is the input. As I said, really important to have an input and an output separate. And again, it helps you not have things being messy. You can make changes to your inputs, and you make changes to your outputs, have them at different levels, and that's quite useful, very powerful. So the sound of the keys is going to master at the moment. That's okay for now, right? So what we're now going to do is we're going to look at the keyboard looper track, this one here, looper track. Now, what we're now going to do is we're going to set up the routing. I'm now going to send the master of the keys in through to the keys looper. Sorry, I'm going to leave it on master there. Let me just check. I'm going to change the external in to keys in. So this is now, the keys looper is taking all of the output from the keys in into itself. So what we should hear, if I now move this to monitor in, we're now actually getting the sound twice going through to the master. So this has actually doubled the sound. And this is a real, going to come in straight here, this is actually quite a real risk for the live looping in this method. If you set up 2 tracks, it's very easy to have the sound coming through twice or doubling. So that's, you really don't want that. You only want the sound coming through once. So that's good. So we've now currently got it coming through twice. All good. So what we're going to do here is we are going to fix this. So we've got 2 tracks. That's all good. And now we'll move on to the second part of our session, which is looper. So section 2, step 2 within our model is looper. Let's have a look at that. So now we're going to set the looper up. So we're going to set the inputs. They're all good. We're now going to set the looper up. Okay, so I will solve this doubling up in a second when we get there, but I now need to go into my audio effects. Audio effects, where are we over here? Audio effects. I'm going to go to delay and loop. I'm just going to drag down the track looper like this. The effect looper. So that's now in. This is a very powerful effect in Ableton. I actually normally have 3 of these loopers on each of my tracks. So this keyboard track would have 3 loopers, and then my drum track would have 3 loopers. What this means is I can have 1 looper for the verse, 1 looper for the chorus, and a spare looper, which it's always helpful to have a spare, but it's very useful. So let's look back at where we're at. So there's a few settings on here I want to just take you through. So the first thing to do is quantization global. That's important, so leave that as global. What that means is whatever you've set up here as your quantization, which is 1 bar, will be taken by the looper. So what that means is when you hit any of the buttons, they wait to the beginning of the next bar to start. If you have it on 1 bar, it's kind of the standard setting in Ableton. If you're not really sure what to do with it, leave it there, it's useful, but it basically means hit the button and it will start on the next bar. Okay, so that's good. So quantization is on global. Start song. So song control is a really important part of it as well. You don't want, in this setup, you don't want this looper to start the song. What that means is if it's on the start song, when you press the looper button, it'll just start playing. You don't want that. You want Ableton to start the looper. So what we'll change is stop is none. The other option is start and stop song, which is quite useful if you want to use that looper for that. But for now, we want none. And tempo control, again, this looper is set up just like a Boss RC1 pedal. So when you press the pedal first and then play your loop, it takes the tempo of how long the loop is and how many beats you've done. So if you leave this as set and follow song tempo, it will basically set the tempo and it will change the tempo to whatever you've played. We don't want that. We want to set the tempo ourselves. So none. So that's important. So you've got song control and the tempo control all sorted out. And all this other stuff's quite useful, but you can leave it where it is. You don't want to reverse anything, and you don't want this sort of set bars or anything. So here, leave the feedback 100%. This is like your knob on the Boss RC1, so how loud the loop is. So if you set that to 50%, it would play back half the volume of what you'd played in. But here is the important bit. Input to output, you want this to say never. When it's set to always, the signal will flow through the looper and you'll hear it as you're playing it, and it will basically create that double sound. Whereas if you click on never, what you'll now notice is when I play this piano, it's only coming through one channel. If I change it back to always, you can see it's coming through both. So by having it to never, what it means is this track won't play until the looper's playing. So that's good. So what I'll just do now quickly, I'll just record a very quick loop. So this looper button here, this big round sort of record button is the one we want, but let's just record a very simple loop quickly. So I mean, not played perfectly, but hopefully you heard that. I'll do it one more time. The sound, listen to the volume of what I'm playing and then the volume of the looper. It should be the same. So let's just make this clear quickly. Oops, stop and then clear. Okay, let's do it again. And I listen to the volume of the piano and notice that I'm pressing the button before the bar. Press. Press. So the sound, I mean, I can get out of time, but the sound volume of the loop and the input is exactly the same. So that's what you want. So you want basically when Elise Trouw plays. Stop. I should clear that as well. So that's what you want. So when Elise Trouw plays her instrument, so one of her most famous ones is the Foo Fighters mashup that she does. She starts with guitar, and as soon as she stops playing the guitar, it carries on as though she's still playing it. So you want it to be exactly the same volume. And actually that means basically you want these to be the same. So the pan and the volume on each of the tracks, you want to leave them the same. Listen to what happens if I muck around with these. So I'm going to make that like -18. We'll just do one more record so you can see what happens if we get the level wrong. Chord. So it's really important to get this level right. And if you get a bit messed up in this space, you can end up with kind of like, you know, your loops sounding pretty weird. But ultimately that's it really. So the loop is now set up. It's looking pretty good. I've set these two channels up, so I've got my keyboards set up and I've got one looper set up there, which is quite good. Now, the next thing I'd like to do is we're going to move on to number 3, chain. So this is where we're going to look at how to set up a really good instrument chain on that piano track. And I think that's going to be really, really useful, hopefully, for you to watch and see how to do that, because there's some really good CPU efficient stuff we're going to do in here. So we're going to add a string sound in, so let's do that. So what we're going to do, so in this example here, I don't just want to use a piano, I want to add some strings to it. So to be able to use different sounds in the Elise Trouw hands-free live looping method, you need to have a method whereby you can select what sound you want at the time you need. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically come over here and I'm going to create an instrument group like this. So right click on this and go group like this. Right click and choose group. Right, so that's it. So that it didn't happen the first time I did it, but so you've now got a group. And what I do like to try and do is I try and name them as I go. So I'll give this a little name, but open up a few of these little buttons here. So those two buttons there give you the macros and the chain, which is really important. And we'll just rename this to be these instruments, like that. So I've now named, I like to name things as I go because it means it keeps things really organized. You could also give it a color. That's quite useful as well if you want. Not necessary, but yeah, there's also things you can do. Actually, I don't know if you can color that one. Anyway, so you can see here within this instrument group I've created, I've got the upright piano here. So that's where the upright piano is. And it's still sounding quite good. So that's all good. So now I'm going to add some strings to this. And again, why don't we use everybody's favorite sample pack, Spitfire Audio. I do love these. So let's add in, I'm going to add all-in-one string quartet, a nice long sound like this. So we'll add that in. And that takes a second or two to load in, but now you can see I've got my upright piano and I've got my instrument again here. You potentially could color it a different color if that helps you. So you can see here we've got piano at the top and then the strings there. So that's really, really helpful. So if I play this together, watch this. The piano and the strings are happening at the same time. That's good, but actually I don't want the piano and the strings at the same time. If you do want them at the same time, that's great, you can do that. So there's a trick, and what we need to do is we need to map these. So I'm going to click on map, sorry, wrong one. We're going to click on the chain. So if you click chain here, this brings up this menu here. And can you see it's quite hidden away, but can you see there are these two bars here? I can actually stretch them or move them around. So for example, I can make that longer or shorter, longer like this. So this blue section you can see here, and this little funny little blue bit there is your selector. So if I move this light blue little kind of thing here and it's hitting at the same time as where that large blue bar is, that will play it. Can you hear there's no strings? And if I move it back over here to where the strings are, only the strings. Okay, so that's quite useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this cheeky little one. The strings are now going to become number 1. And I'm going to shrink this back down to 0 again. So I've got piano on number 1. Sorry, piano's on 0. And then if I move this little light turquoise bar to number 1, I get strings. Very useful. But now if I right click on that little turquoise bar and I go map to macro 1, and watch over here, watch over here on the little macro, these little buttony things here. This name will change when I do this. So map to macro 1, and that now says chain selector. So already it's a bit more helpful. So I've got one little button here. I don't have to come over and grab a crazy little kind of turquoise bar. If I move this to 0, piano, and if I move this to 1, strings. Again, you can click on there and type 0, or you can click on there and type 1. So you can do it with the mouse, you can do it with the keyboard. Really, really helpful. But of course, Elise Trouw doesn't. She doesn't have mouse and keyboard, and she's not like pressing mouses and keyboards to change the instrument sounds at all. Of course not. She's not doing that. So what we now need to do is find a way of triggering that and moving it around with MIDI. But before we get there, I think there's a really powerful, and I'm actually gonna, I think, show you just this screen because I'm going to lose my beautiful face and allow you to actually see what's going on here. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so this is good. Oops. So I would like to show you a really good technique. Actually, before I do that, I want to just explain. You saw that I had 2 instruments, one above the other, piano and then strings. In many of your situations, if you set up your own live looping setup, you'll end up with more than just 2 instruments. I have 50 on my normal track. You might get up to 100, depends on how many different sounds you want. If you do that, what will happen is all of those instruments will be on. They're all in there, sitting there, using up your CPU, which is great. It means you can then trigger as you move that instrument, as you move, as we showed you, as you move this chain selector around, you can select whatever instrument you want. really useful, but they're all on and they're all maxing out your CPU. And what I found is that pretty quickly I started to get, if you look at the Ableton screen up here at the top, you can see that 2%, that pretty quickly started to get above 20 and 30%. And whenever I was there, it meant my session became a bit unstable. So I did a bit of searching. I found some really good information out there on the internet, and it showed me a technique I can use. So what we're going to do, we are now going to effectively turn the instruments off. Say you had those 50 instruments, we're going to turn the 49 instruments that you're not using off when you're not using them. It'll be clearer, I think, when I show you. So what we're going to do is we're on the piano here, right? So we're going to right click on the on button for the piano. See where my little yellow bit is there? We're going to right click on that on button, and we're going to click on map to chain selector. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go down to we're going to click on the strings one, and here you see the strings all in one. We're going to right click on that, and we're going to map that to the chain selector as well. And all that means is that those on and off buttons are now controlled by the chain selector, the same little button here that controls what instrument you have. Now here's where I'm going to click on map, and you can see what's going on here. So you can see here the chain selector is firstly this little piece up here, this little section up here shows us what we've got mapped. So I've mapped three things, haven't I? I've mapped the chain selector to the chain selector, so it literally moves the instruments around, and I've now mapped the chain selector to the piano and the long all-in-one string sound to the device on or off button. And here's the settings you need, because piano is on the 0 chain selector. I'm going to type 0 into there, and because, oops, not 2, and because the strings is on 1, you need 1 and 1 in there. Now watch what happens here. I'm going to come out of the map mode. So I'm now going to, this is now on 0. So piano is working, so that's working still. If I now turn that to be 1, strings. Now, because I'm selected on 1, if I click on upright piano, can you see upright piano is off? And if I select 0, upright piano comes on. And if I look at the strings on and 1, strings is off. So what that means is if I come back to this map screen and just try to explain it a bit more, maybe a bit more clearly, what this does is it basically means that you only have the piano on when chain selector says 0, and when it says any other number, it's off. And you only have the strings on when the chain selector says 1, and all the other numbers is off. If you think about it, that's what you want. That's pretty useful. So I do that as I'm setting up an instrument chain. You can also do it with effects chains. So again, I've got an electric guitar in my setup, and it's got like, I think 15 or 20 different effects. And again, if they're all on all the time, they're eating up your CPU. So you can use the same chain of selector trick, and you can turn off all your effects when you're not using them, which is quite useful. So I do this as I build a music performance. So I'm kind of baking in CPU upfront, savings upfront. Good. Top tip while we're here, I use Ableton Live Suite. And the reason I use it, I was talking about electric guitar earlier, it has access to really good electric guitar effects such as amp and cabinet, which I really love. And I literally only use stock Ableton plugins for my guitar, and it sounds just as good as some of the other plugins. You have to spend a bit of time working on it, but it's good. Okay, so now the next section is trigger. So we're now going to get into MIDI triggering. We've got the looper set up, that's ready to go. We've also got a simple instrument chain set up. But at the moment, the problem is I'm moving the mouse around to trigger things, and that's not what you want. You want to do everything hands-free. So as you saw earlier, come back into Ableton. As you sort of click on my looper here. Okay, as you saw earlier, clicking down here on the looper button makes the looper work and makes it start recording. However, we can use MIDI triggers to trigger this button from a MIDI note. You can also do keyboard triggering. You access, just quickly show it up here, top right, you access the MIDI triggering by hitting this button here, or Apple M, or I think Control M in Windows. But there's also this button here, which is keys, which is Apple K or Control K on Windows, which is keyboard mapping. So you can do either MIDI mapping or keyboard mapping. So we're going to do MIDI mapping today. So all you need to do is you need to follow some very simple steps to do MIDI triggering. Now, my keyboard, as you remember from earlier, is set to channel 2, and that was by design, but I actually want all these triggers to be on channel 1 for a reason we'll get to in a little bit. So I'm just going to quickly, bear with me a second, change my keyboard to be channel 1 rather than channel 2. Okay, good. So my keyboard is now channel 1. So to do MIDI mapping, you click on MIDI here. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to click on the button that I want to trigger. So you can see I'm hovering around here around the looper button we pressed earlier. I'm going to press that button once, and then you can see on my keyboard here, I'm going to just press this C note here. And straight away there, you can see up in the menu bar up here, I have now got note C6 is now hitting the pedal note, the pedal button or the looper button on the pedal, and you can also see down here on the button itself, it's got 1/C6. It's really clear and you can see visibly what's happening. So I've now set up a trigger. So I'm going to come out of MIDI trigger. I'm going to set my keyboard back to channel 2. So now if I hold up, that was the wrong thing to do. Ignore me, I'm not going to play anything because it's on channel 1. But now if I press C6, watch this. I'm playing. You can be playing. If I press this note here, C6, it starts the looper. Press it again, it stops the looper. And this button is literally just doing whatever would happen if I press this button. So I can go between overdub and play mode really, really simply by just pressing, you can see me here, just pressing that note there. Triggers everything on there. So I've got the MIDI triggering set up really nicely. I think if I hold it down, it should hopefully clear it. Good. So that's all good. So I have set up the MIDI mapping. So that's good. It's quite simple. So I've got my looper button triggered by a MIDI note C6. That's helpful. Now I'd also like to be able to have control of changing the instrument chain that you saw earlier. So in this example, I'm going to show you MIDI mapping for that looper button, that pedal button, but I'm also going to show you, I want to be able to MIDI map changing this chain selector. So I want this to be mapped to a MIDI note. So obviously when it's 1, when it's 0, it's piano, and when it's 1, it's strings. So I can't do the MIDI mapping how I just did. I can't just click on MIDI and then hit a note because I don't want a note to trigger this. I want what's called a MIDI CC message. That stands for continuous controller. So there are 2 main types of MIDI message that I use: MIDI note, like hitting a note on a keyboard, and MIDI controller. What that is, where has it gone? That is a bit like using one of these knobs. It's a bit like a knob control effectively. I like to think of it like so. MIDI note is like a button, and MIDI CC is like a knob. And ideally, I'd like a CC note to change this chain selector because it effectively, you can even see it looks like a knob. So that's really, really helpful. So if you've not used MIDI CC before, MIDI CC messages or envelopes as they're called in Ableton, and they're really useful. There's actually in every single MIDI channel, there's 128 CC messages that you can use. So it's really, really helpful. So we're going to use MIDI channel 1 again and MIDI CC20 as the message. So I'm not going to do it now because I haven't actually got a knob set up to do this, but I will be changing this. So this will be triggered by, as I said, MIDI channel 1, MIDI CC20. We'll show what that looks like in a second. But now the next phase we're going to now look at automate. So automating what I've just showed you. So we've got MIDI triggering set up. We actually now, it still needs something to be pressed. You saw me pressing that note there on the keyboard. That's still important. You still need to press a note. I want this to happen live in Ableton. So remember I said you can't do this native in Ableton. There's no native kind of way of setting this up. You have to have something external. So there's 2 techniques I use. The first uses something called the IAC driver, and it's only available on Mac computers like what I've got. And it's also fixed to MIDI channel 1, which I'm not quite sure why. The second technique is the BOM MIDI translator software that I use. It's far more flexible than IAC, and it has way more features, and it isn't fixed to channel 1, but you do have to buy it. As I said earlier, you can run the software as a trial. It works for 20 minutes at a time before needing to be restarted, so it's a pretty great trial, to be fair. So these two techniques, IAC and BOM MIDI translator, they're quite similar. But before we do the IAC technique, we'll need to make sure we've got the settings are right in the audio MIDI settings. So quickly up here, let me just bring up my audio MIDI settings. So if you're on a Mac and you want to use the IAC driver, there's something called audio MIDI settings you can find in applications. And when you open it, you'll find that there's an IAC driver here, and you'll double click on it, and it either has to be offline or online. So this little tick here will turn the IAC driver online, and that's literally all you need to be able to do. Great. Okay, so now we've done that, we just need to make sure that the MIDI routing is set up correctly. So we're going to go and enter the MIDI settings. So we're going to go to live and then preferences, and come up, and you can see here that we've got the there's a number of different menus over here, but if you go to the link tempo MIDI, what you need to do is you need to make sure the IAC driver in has track and remote ticked, and then the IAC driver out down here is track and remote are both ticked as well. So once you've done that, you can close down the preferences menu, and that is it. So I think you're pretty much done with setup, and this is ready to go. So the next thing we're now going to need to do is insert a new MIDI track. I like to keep all of my commands for IAC or BOM on its own particular track. So let's rename this one. I'm going to call this one rename. I'm going to call this one IAC. Okay. And we don't want any input. So we don't want an input from an instrument coming in. So I don't want my keyboard or anything else to trigger it. So this is going to be purely triggered by the purely by a clip, which we'll show you in a second. The output needs to go, MIDI output needs to go to IAC driver bus 1 like this. So that's quite good. And then that's fine. Great. So what we're now going to do is I'm going to come into arrangement view, and within this IAC driver, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. I'm just going to create a very simple clip. Double click here, turn loop off. It's going to be 1 bar long. And remember I said that note C6 would trigger the looper. So I'm going to make this just be a note C6. That's a long note for the whole bar, like this. So whenever we hit this clip, it will trigger the looper. I'll bring up here. So this looper, if I start playing from about here, when the cursor goes over the IAC, playing note C6, it will trigger the looper. Hands free. Watch this. Let's trigger it. Starts playing. Great. Really nice and easy. So stop that for a second. And we'll stop this. Right, so what we actually do need to do is we need to start it and we need to stop it. So I only did the start it there. So let's copy that. I'm going to paste it here. So we've now got 2 clips. So it's going to press the loop. It's going to press the loop button once. And I'm going to clear it first. Let's watch that again. So I've got 2. I've got the note C6 being played by the IAC track. Watch this. And presses the looper button. Starts the looper because it's on 1 bar. Presses the loop button again and stops it. So there we go. That's hands-free live looping. And just pausing there for a second, that is literally Elise Trouw method. It's as simple as that. So once you've got the IAC driver set up and your MIDI mapping set up, you can start and stop things on a track, on this track. So you can then set up a relatively easy, simple, complex, whatever you want set up that enables you to automate MIDI triggering. So it's really, really awesome. So, I mean, that really is quite simply the method. So that's all good. So that's pretty good. What I'm going to do now is I'm also going to show you how it works with BOM MIDI Translator. But as I said again earlier, I do have a where is it? I do have a code for you. So if you like the look of BOM, go along to that the BOM Shop, BOM MIDI Translator. You can try it, free trial, 20 minutes. You can use it without you know, before we have to reopen it again, I think. And if you use the offer code Oliver20, you get 20% off. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at BOM. So let's get to the BOM menu. Where is it? There. Okay, so this is BOM. So it is, once you get used to it, quite relatively simple software. It's not actually that complicated. Where am I there? Once you get used to it, as I said, it's not that complicated. It is relatively simple. But what you need to do is you need to firstly set up the inputs and outputs. And if you click over here, or is it in preferences, MIDI, and you go along here, you can see project. Actually, I think it's been cut off at the top, but if you click on the MIDI menu and click on project default MIDI ports like this, this comes up here. And you need to make sure you've ticked BOM MIDI Translator Virtual in here, and you need to have ticked BOM MIDI Translator Virtual out here. Those two need to be ticked. It's really important. And that's all you need for this technique. Now, I've done a whole video on BOM MIDI Translator, and I'll do another one, I'm sure, and I'll probably do a live stream on BOM MIDI Translator. But very simply, there are translators, for example, like these. These are all individual translators, and these are set up very specifically to take the output from Ableton and send it back in. So it's kind of creating, it's a bit like creating a loop back method. Let me just show you what I mean. I've got a little kind of thing here that shows it to you. So what BOM does, from Ableton, we send note on, note off, and MIDI control messages from Ableton. On channel 8 is the one I've chosen. They go to BOM, and BOM sends them straight back, the same message back. But remember I said Ableton can't do its MIDI mapping or its MIDI translating natively. It has to have something else sending it, like the IAC, and this loop back is very important. And it's a bit complicated, and we can kind of get into it a little bit, but what the translators are doing, if I just click quickly on this first one, note on, what I'm telling it to say is a raw MIDI message, 97 ppqq. Let's go back to this menu here. Oops, wrong button. 90 ppqq. If I go back to my thing here, so 97 ppqq, this basically means that I want to take all the note on messages that come out and send them back. Let me just try and explain it to you a little bit. So this is hex code. So in BOM, the code on the bottom right, this little table I'm talking about, shows you how it tells BOM what to do. So in hex code, 9 means in the first digit, there's always 6 codes. 9 means note on, 8 means note off, and B means MIDI CC. So you can see in that little table, note on starts with 9, note off starts with 8, and MIDI CC starts with B. Now, the second code is a 7, and that actually means channel 8, which is a bit weird. And then your PP and your QQ are variables. So they basically mean whatever volume of note and whatever note you send, or whatever exact MIDI CC message and whatever value of it is held as PP or QQ as a variable. So it's like a bit of coding basically, whereas BOM can take any note you play, any MIDI CC message, and send it back. So if you send quite hard to explain, but if you send a C6 note from Ableton into BOM, BOM will send back a C6 note, exactly the same velocity. If you send a MIDI control, continuous controller or MIDI CC message on channel 8 of number 20, it will send it back straight. So kind of you need to set that up. So I don't think I've explained that very well, but if you just literally were to copy these 3 translators and that code I typed in there, set up BOM with an incoming trigger of MIDI MIDI message, raw MIDI, and typed in 97 ppqq, and the outgoing message was MIDI message raw 97 ppqq. That would deal with the note on, and it would send any note on back, and then you need to copy it down and have very similar but 87 ppqq and 87 ppqq in the ingoing and the outgoing. That's the note off message, so all your notes are coming in nicely back out again. And then if you then, for the CC messages, it's B7 ppqq and B7 ppqq. So literally if you load up BOM and copy those three translators in and set your ins and outs like I've shown you, that's literally all you have to do. And then if we now go back to Ableton, and again we go to Ableton's preferences, it's the same deal. In the link tempo MIDI section, you need to have the BOM MIDI translator as track and remote, and it's a little bit lower down, and the BOM MIDI translator track and remote as well. So that's done. So what it now allows me to do is if I add another MIDI track and I call this one BOM, and I literally copy these two down. At the moment, I'm not going to have any input as before, so I'm having it very similar. So there's no input, but the output is BOM MIDI translator on channel 1. If you look, if I go back to the keys looper, it should perform exactly the same technique. So if I press play, oh, my bad. The input should be BOM MIDI translator. Okay, let's go. Yeah, that's not working. Let me work out why. Because, of course, like a fool, it has to be channel 8. So let me go back to no input. And we're now going to make this channel 8 because I set it in BOM as being channel 8. So it's not a problem. So we've still got the C6, but do you remember if I click on the MIDI mapping mode, you can see, oops, wrong screen. I click on the MIDI mapping mode up here. You can see that I've got note C6 is in channel 1. So the far left, that C that above the C shows what channel it is. I need that to be channel 8 for this to work. So let me just quickly, I'll delete, actually I'll leave that on. What we're going to do is I'm now going to show you a really good technique that allows you to trigger and set up MIDI triggers by using BOM like this. So I want to trigger, so I'm going to delete this mapping, so there's now no longer any mapping on the looper. So I'm in MIDI mapping mode. So if I click on the looper pedal button and then press the space bar, brilliant, that's done. So the space bar is play, and I've literally played past this channel 8 note C6, and can you see up here now in the MIDI mapping, it's now channel 8 note C6, and that's the looper. So that's actually all you need to do. So you can actually use the BOM or the IAC driver to trigger the MIDI triggering. So that's good. So let's watch this again, make sure it works. So when I play this, it presses the looper button, and the loop is going, it presses it again, and that's it. So I have now hopefully shown you a really simple technique for setting up in IAC and BOM. And I use BOM because, frankly, there's loads of other stuff it does. I use it to put lyrics up on the screen of my live streams. I use it to do all sorts of other things, but it's really, really helpful and useful. Oh, I also use it to change the camera angles when I'm performing live, which is useful. So going back now quickly to Ableton, do you remember I showed you, I'm going to delete these off because we don't need them quite for now for a while. Do you remember I showed you that I wanted on my keys in, I want to be able to map this chain selector down here, and I wanted to map it on channel 8 to MIDI CC20. So let's do that. I'll just do that and show you. So I'm going to again create a new clip. I'm going to turn the loop off so I can extend the length like this. And this one is slightly longer, doesn't really matter. So in a MIDI clip, you can see here that I've created, and if I go down to this section, this sort of not on the first clip bit, under the colorful section that's green here, over in these little tabs here, the first tab is notes, and that's where you've got your piano roll like this. If I click on the second tab, you get the envelopes section. It's called envelopes, but actually envelopes basically means control CC. So I'm going to choose MIDI CC, and if you click this button here, you see all 128 of the MIDI CCs are available for you to program. So I said I wanted 20, so let's choose 20 on here. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to literally just create a little shape like this, like that. So that's now changing the MIDI CC 20 from 0 to 127 over the life of this clip. While we're here, just so you might, I'm just going to call it increasing. I can spell that right. Anyway, so again, we're now going to use this to trigger, and so I'm going to start the clip. I'm going to start the playback starting there. Oops, from here, and I'm going to go up to the MIDI instrument, and I'm now going to enter MIDI mapping mode. I'm going to click on the chain selector down here. And I'm going to press the space bar to start playing. You'll notice now I've mapped the chain selector to 8 and 20. So channel 8, CC note 20, CC control 20. So that now means that if I come out of MIDI mapping mode, this little knob here is now being controlled by things that are on this track. And so whenever I choose CC20 on channel 8, it will move it. That's really useful. So I've now got two MIDI mapped notes, note C6 on channel 8 to change, to press the looper button, and then CC20 on channel 8 as well, which will then change the instruments. So if I just show you that in action quickly now, so I'm going to delete that off there. I'm going to start with a new one. I'm now going to call this one, I'm going to turn the loop off. I'm going to rename this one. This is going to be piano, and it's going to last as long as I want it to last. Like maybe let's say 2 bars, right? And here I'm in the envelope section. I'm on MIDI CC20, and if I just grab it and move it up and down, if this is always on 0, that will always be a piano sound. Do the same thing again. Create a new clip, loop, rename it. This one's going to be called strings. I'm going to make this again 2 bars long, and it's on envelope section in here, MIDI CC note 20, and I'm going to make that number 1 like that. So what happens when I play this? This will now mean it starts on piano. Interestingly, that's not happening. Why that is. What's going on? Use in piano. Aha, good. I am not on channel 2 on my keyboard. One sec. I turned my keyboard to be channel 1 earlier, but remember I said earlier I want this to be channel 2. There's a really good reason for it being channel 2, because if it's channel 1, it gets in the way of IAC, so we don't want that. So it's channel 2. Anyway, my keyboard's working. So back to the example I'm trying to show you. So if I start here, whenever my cursor is, whenever the kind of playback is flowing through where it says piano, let's recolor these, they're awful colors, aren't they? Whenever it's on the piano color, it will be piano sound. When it's on the strings color, so in fact if I just place my cursor there, piano, and if I place it here, strings. Really, really simple. You hear that? So I might need to make those strings sound a bit more, just a little bit stronger. So a bit, let's go. Better, isn't it? Right, so anyway, let's hear this. So I'm going to now play this. I'm on strings. So I'm going to play it. When the locator gets over the piano section from bar 5 to bar 7, it will turn to piano and turn back to strings. So watch this. So very, very simple. So I can control the sound of the instrument I want with just putting clips there like that, and I can make the loopers start and loopers stop. So I could, literally play around, and it's very, very simple. So very, very useful. So done all that. One other thing I'd like to do just quickly, I'm going to change the envelope. I want to sort of do something that will make the strings sound differently. So I've shown you the technique of mapping a MIDI CC to the instrument. But if I now move to back into keys in, I'm on the strings here, I can automate anything from this instrument. So let me just do technique. I'm going to automate technique. So let's do that. So that'd be quite a nice one to automate. So we're going to call this technique. Just to show you the same thing again, just make it obvious what we're doing. So again, I'm going to now make this be a, whoops, I'm going to make this be a, I don't know, 2 bars long. I hate that color, so let's just change it. And we're going to choose now MIDI CC 21. It can't be 20 because 20 is set to change the instrument. It's going to be MIDI CC 21, and I'll just literally create a little envelope like that. I'm going to start the song playing here. Click on keys again, and we're going to now enter MIDI mode. Click on technique. So now when I press play, you'll see in a second. 821, so you can see it's come up here again. So CC21 channel 8 is now keys in on the technique. So if you now listen to what happens when I now come out of MIDI mode, and so I change the technique, this is what happens now. I'll show you that again by clicking on the clip and showing you the actual envelope. Oops. Let's go from there. So the point being, why I'm showing you that is that you can literally, the reason I'm showing you that is because you can literally automate absolutely any feature of Ableton from within that Ableton BOM or IAC track. So again, remember, if you are a Windows user, you can't use the IAC, so you'll probably have to buy BOM or find a different technique. I'm a Mac user and I use BOM because it's really, really useful. Absolutely really helpful. So I think I find that using MIDI CC messages is really, really, really helpful. I use it for panning instruments. So you can have a MIDI CC set up. Maybe 22 would be set up for panning of instruments. I use it for the level, so increasing and decreasing the volume of the instruments. Effects like reverb. If I'm singing a slower song, sometimes you want a bit more reverb, or if it's a faster song, you want less. So you can use a MIDI CC trigger to do that. Changing the effects on my electric guitar, already mentioned. And actually also, really key one is changing the tempo of the song. You can literally, if I go back into here, you can literally come up and you can literally MIDI map. You can MIDI map. I'm sorry, I just even pressed the wrong button. You can MIDI map tempo here. So you could literally change that by using a CC in the same way, having a clip where it increased and decreased, which again you might find lots of really interesting uses for. So I often have more than one song saved down in any one arrangement. So you can see here's my arrangement view. I'll build a song on like this. With all the different things happening, the loop is starting, the loop is stopping. So at the beginning of each of those songs, I'll set the tempo by creating a MIDI CC that's at the right level, and that's it. So really, really good. So that is, I think, where we've got to. I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm just going to take a second and say we've done quite a lot already. So we've looked at the inputs. 2 inputs, 2 inputs per instrument. The first one's the input, the second one's the looper. Really, really important to have them separate, as I've showed you. The second bit was showing you how to set up the looper, really quite simple, really. The third thing was the chain. So we've looked at that and we've meant that the instrument chain is really efficient, which is great. So you're not using too much CPU, but you can also change the instruments on the fly with one of the macros. Number 4 was the trigger. So I've shown you how to do MIDI triggering, which hopefully is really useful. And number 5, the one we've just done, is automate. So we've now used IAC and BOM. So you can see the power of setting up these little clips within your arrangement view. And they will, at the exact point you want them to, trigger anything in Ableton. Literally anything. And so when you see Elise Trouw pick up a guitar and press start playing it and then stop, because the loop is captured. It's literally a clip like that is just triggering a looper to capture the song, and she's away. So you've kind of got everything you need. We spent an hour. This live stream will be going on for about an hour. And you've kind of got everything you need to set up the Elise Trouw method. And you could almost use everything you've seen with me today and just spend a bit of time investing it in putting in more instruments, making sure they've got loopers, setting it all up. So that would be fine. But there are some more steps that I think are worth going through. And I think the next one we're going to look at is going to be number 6, outputs. So in very simple terms, at the moment, everything in this file, if I just quickly come back to the Ableton view and then move back to the session view. So can you see everything? These two, so the input files, keys in and keys looper, they are going to master. The audio is going to the master out for both of them. And that's okay at the moment, that's fine. And if you had a very simple setup where you just wanted whatever was going through here to be what the audience heard, that would be useful, that would be fine. And if you didn't want to hear anything differently, that would be fine. But I'm pretty sure that Elise Trouw has a metronome when she's playing, and I use a metronome when I'm playing to give me a count in before I start playing. It's really, really helpful. But you definitely don't want the audience to hear the metronome or the click track, do you? That's definitely not good. So I played around with this quite a bit and found a really good solution that works. So it's number 6, outputs. So what we have to do, we create 2 stereo outputs. The first one is called performance mix. And that is the sound you want the audience to hear. So that definitely doesn't have your click track on it. And the second stereo output you'll create is called the cue mix. And this allows you to have the metronome and a bunch of other things like the lyrics and things in your ears. And also you can make sure the mix you're hearing is right for you. If you've performed much with in-ear monitoring, getting the mix correct is really important. And I actually find I like to have the looper level much lower in my ears so I can really hear the instrument I'm playing, but you don't want the audience to hear that. You want the audience to hear the seamless move change between looping and instruments. So how do we do this? Well, it's easy. We create 2 return tracks. So let's do the first one. Click over here. I'm going to go insert return track. I didn't write. Insert return track. Okay, I'm going to call this rename. I'm going to call this A performance. Then we're going to add another return track. I'm going to call this. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call this B Q mix. So everything that goes to A will be the stuff that the audience hears, and everything that goes to B will be what you hear, the performer hears. What you also might have noticed is that as I added these, there are now these 2 send knobs underneath each of the tracks. These weren't here before until I added these in. What this means is each of these knobs will send a particular amount of each of these tracks to that send. So what we actually want to do is turn them all up to 100. Okay. And again, what we need to do is we need to make sure we don't want to hear these tracks twice. So now I'm going to change these from master to sends only. So this is, getting to the stage of actually really being in control of where everything's going. So if we now just look back at the keys in, the piano plays here. It comes in and it sends it to keys looper, and the keys looper captures all the tracks, but then we send the output to performance and cue mix. And again, at the moment, actually, it's doubling because it's coming through both, and it's going to the master in both cases. Okay, so that's fine. So I'm going to leave the performance going to master. But what I actually do normally is I set them to be external out 1 and 2, and external out 3 and 4. That allows me to send it to the right channels within my software. Still working, but it's fine. So that's what you do. So now again, it won't be doubled because we're sending the second one to a different output that you're not hearing. You can also mute these channels if you want to. Okay, great. So you follow these steps. You've got a performance mix on track 1 and 2, and a headphones or cue mix on 3 and 4. And this has the So then what we need to do is, if you want the click track, it's got to be the master actually. So wait 1 second. I'm actually going to send that to the master, and I'm going to send that to. And the master is going to be 3 and 4. So this is what I found worked for me. So I want I've got a headphone jack for 1 and 2 and a headphone jack for 3 and 4. So within master, that means we should still hear the click. Let's just double check. Okay, we're not hearing the click because my bad. Sorry. 1 and 2, and that should be master, and this will be external out 3 and 4. Bear with me. So we can still hear the click now, I think. Let's just press play. Good. Right, so I've reversed this round actually. I've got the click coming through the performance channel because that's the channel I want it to come through for you, but you would actually reverse this. But anyway, it's good. So you've basically now got complete control of how your music comes out. You can put different amounts of instruments and sounds into whichever mix you want, and play around with it to get the right performance mix. So you can literally mix your performance using the A button, so a bit more of this, a bit less of this, as you have loads more instruments, and then you can mix your Q mix using the B channel here, and that works really, really well. But there are some other really, really powerful things. So that's good. So I've shown you how to set up 2 different mixes. One goes into your ears, one goes to the performer, to the output, to the performers. That's really helpful. But there are some really, really good things that you can do with this Q mix. And I want to now show you. This is section 7, Q. And we're going to create a Q track. And this is going to be something where we load in a bunch of really useful things that can help you with performance. So let's go back to Ableton. So I'm now going to create another track. It's going to be an audio track, and I'm going to call it audio track, and I'm going to call it Q mix. Rename Q mix. And I'm going to give it a slightly more interesting color than that. Let's go crazy pink. Okay, so this is your Q mix, and what this is going to be, we're going to send this only to the sends only, and we're going to send it only to your Q mix like this. So whatever instruments you put, whatever sounds, whatever you put into this Q mix, you can record yourself literally instructions of what to do. It will only go through to B Q mix, which is then what you'll hear. It won't, none of it goes to A. So you can, so what I use this for is I record, sometimes I struggle with lyrics on some songs. Weirdly, the opening to Everlong, Hello, I've Waited Here For You, I just can't seem to think of it when I'm about to start singing it. So on my version here is I say, hello, I've waited here for you. And then as soon as I start that, I'm fine. So if we go back to the arrangement view like this, I get off my fat face off the way. In this Q mix here, we can literally just, well, do whatever you want. So I'm just going to record that as we said here. I'm going to arm it. It's set to the right microphone. So let's just try this. I'm going to go, hello, I've waited here for you. That's it. And now we should hear that whenever, pretty low gain, so not make it a bit bigger so you can really hear it. Oops, that's too much. So that will now, that instruction, hello, I've waited here for you, which is the opening line of the song, the Foo Fighters song, Everlong, will be spoken to me just before I need to sing it. So it's not only a really helpful to have the output and the input, so the 2 outputs separate, so your monitoring ears are separate. You can actually now hear this. So this, I'm now going to turn off the input, so we don't want any other inputs until we're recording on it. And just remind ourselves where it's going. It's going to send B, which is fine. I'm now going to send it through to send A as well, just so you can hear what it would sound like. Hello, I've waited here for you. Great, I think it's being doubled. It's going through 2 places. And I know why. I know why, because it's going to 2 places. Don't know why. Don't know why it's going through 2 places. Anyway, but set that up. Use the Q mix to really help you. And I mean, like, famous singers do this. I know Lady Gaga and others do this. They actually have someone speaking in their ear as they're doing their performance. You need to get off stage and go and change into your next costume. The first line of this song is X. You probably can't afford a whole person to sit there cueing you what you're going to do, but you can use this track to do exactly the same thing. And when you're performing an arrangement like this, it worked pretty well. So I've done the cue tracking. That's all good. It's working quite well. So really, that is the full system. It's how I performed for the first 12 months of my live streams. I use this technique in the system. So it worked really well for me. I used the techniques in this system to create a really strong sounding set list. I had drums, guitars, keyboards, and vocals routing through the system. And I set up arrangement after arrangement using the BOM track to automate the loopers. And I had a lot of fun. However, there was a major problem with my performing. Every now and then, despite having really clear instructions in my cue mix and a really good set of visual cues. So if you go back to look at Ableton, you can also look at the screen. It's telling you what's happening with some really good visual cues. Even though I had those things, I sometimes struggled with the transitions between instruments. For example, I might grab my guitar, and as I put it over my neck, the strap comes off. And within this system, it's a bit of a problem. You only have a very set period of time before a looper starts recording. If we go back to my example here, if, say, for example, I'm putting my guitar on myself here, and then it falls off, and I've only got the 2 bars here, and maybe this green little section here is going to trigger the guitar to start being loop recorded. If that's if I've got 2 bars and I'm mucking around with a guitar that's fallen off me, I miss the loop. It can ruin songs because you don't get another chance in this system to press another button and start again. You miss the part you're going to play and it never comes back. That's very different from like the Ed Sheeran technique of looping, where he only presses the pedal when he's ready, so he can allow the kind of chorus or the verse to last a little bit longer until he wants to stop it or start it, and it gives a bit more kind of stability. So if he did drop the guitar, and I've actually seen him on one of the Glastonbury's, I think his guitar was out of tune, and he could actually hand the guitar and swap it, and get another guitar back on, plug it back in, and back on with the show, and it had the loop and the verse hanging in the background. Anyway, so I came up with, and I'm very proud of it, a vamping system. So this vamping system, crazy things, isn't it? So this vamping system is like I described to you earlier. If you've ever been in a band with a singer, and I've been in a few wedding bands and sort of function bands, if the singer, for whatever reason, feels they need more time, they might turn around and do this to you. So they're going, and what that generally means, it's a sort of universal singer kind of signal. It means keep going, I'm not ready yet. The band then keeps playing. If they're playing a little riff, they'll just keep going around that riff, loop it round, and that's called vamping. And sometimes I think the term comes from when you're in sort of theatre kind of orchestras, they'll or bands, they'll kind of vamp round underneath the dialogue as the people are speaking. There'll be a bit of kind of vamping music. So that's where it comes from. Coming back to the band example, when the singer is finally ready and they've got themselves to a good place, they might then go, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're back in. So that gives a singer in a band space to kind of compose themselves and be ready. So I thought this would be quite a good solution to implement into my looping. So I've created a method where the virtual band will loop around a section until I'm ready. And then I hit something like a MIDI drum or a MIDI key or a button, and it tells Ableton that I'm ready to go and then moves to the next section. To be honest, it does slightly go against the ethos of the system I'm setting up. I'm having to hit a trigger. So if, for example, I had this button here, and for me to tell the looper to move to the next one, I have to press this button. It slightly destroys the ethos of the Elise Trouw hands-free live looping, but it is a great way to give yourself a bit of space within these arrangements. So I tend to only use it on tricky sections where I know putting a guitar on or swapping a guitar or getting behind the drum kit takes a bit longer. But it's a great way to improve the performances, and it definitely reduces stress. So let me show you how I do it. So we're going to go back into Ableton. So to do this, I use locators. So locators are the things you can add. This top little bar here along the top, if I right click, I can go add locator. That helps. For whatever reason it didn't add. add locator. And I'm going to call this one vamp start. Let's do that, okay? And then I'm going to add another locator here, and I'm going to be next section. So what I'm basically saying here is between these 4 bars, let's see if I can show you, between these 4 bars, I'm a bit close, aren't my little face, my little circular face a bit close to it. Between these 4 bars, it will loop around these. I want it to loop around this vamp section, okay? And when I'm ready, I want it to go onto this section here. Okay, I want it to hit back to this section. So there's a little technique I've got which works quite well. So I'm going to MIDI map these 2, and that will basically be really helpful for us. So for what I'm going to do for starters, I'm going to use, if you just remember the technique that I showed you, I'm going to delete all this stuff. I don't need this anymore. Get rid of all that. Okay, get rid of all that. I do appear to somehow have got doubling sound, which I want to get rid of. So I'm just going to mute the Q mix. Okay. Good. Let's get rid of that now. Okay. So okay, this is good. So back to this view. So I would like to MIDI map vamp start and MIDI map next section. So we can do that in the same way I showed you earlier. Using BOM, we're going to add a clip, and I've already used, so this will be in this is in channel 8 as before, and I'm going to choose note. We had C6, didn't we? So let's just stay around that area. We're going to add in D6, and let's just now MIDI map the first locator. So I click vamp start, press play. Great, vamp start is mapped. Now I'm going to change this to E flat 6, and I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to MIDI map that. That failed, interestingly. Let's try again. MIDI map. Next section. Why is this not working? It's a bit annoying. Let's bring this along here. MIDI map. Next section. Okay, yeah, mapped it. For some reason that wasn't working. I don't know. Anyway, so I've mapped now. Hopefully, I've mapped note D6 and note D sharp 6 to vamp start and next section. So let's come back to this. So if I want to go back to the start, I need to play a D6. So what happens here? If I now this, I'm going to call this, rename this to vamp. Okay. So whenever this clip plays, I want this to send me back to the vamp. Okay. So this needs to be the D note. Let's do that there. And I'm now going to trigger this in the last bar before the next section. Okay. So what happens now? So I'm going to start from the vamp, and when it hits this, you'll notice it will then go back to the start again. So it's a 4-bar phrase, and very soon back to vamp start. So that very simple technique there of having a locator being triggered by something on the track means that this will now become effectively an infinite loop. Okay. Now that's great. So let's just say this is happening in my song. I've got to a section I know is quite tricky. I've left 4 bars for it, but I'm not sure if 4 bars is going to be enough. I can implement that situation. So this clip that will take me, and these locators, and that will take me back to the beginning of that vamp section and keep looping it around and looping it around until I'm ready. So how do I tell Ableton I'm ready? Well, I'm now going to use the note D sharp 6. And I'm going to quickly change I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to change my keyboard to channel 8, because remember it's on channel 8. That's channel 8, good. So if I come back to here, this keyboard now, and D6 here is channel 8. So what will happen if I go back to Ableton, if I press D6, I'm playing. Okay, vamp start. Okay, great. So what's happened here is, so you can't see it on here, but this note here is D sharp 6. Okay, so whenever I press this, this will take me to next section. So as I'm going to zoom in a little bit and make it a bit easier to see. So here we are. Oops. So you see everything. So the 4 bars are here. Vamp starts there. Next section starts there. So I need to, if I just, let's go back to what's happening here. So I'm going to press play on this section, and it's going to vamp around this, and it's going to hit. So when this note is hit, we go back to the beginning of vamp as we've seen before. Good. So what I need to do is hit this E sharp note here straight after now, and then I've exited the section. So as long as you press the trigger for the next section after the trigger of back vamp, let me show that one more time. I'm going to press vamp start. I probably should have done some 2 bars, it'd be a bit easier to see, wouldn't it? But you can see it flowing through. So I'm not going to press anything this time. Triggered back to vamp. So vamp start, it gets triggered. So I'm now ready with my E6 note, D sharp 6 note, and I'm going to trigger it after this green note. Now trigger it now. It takes me through to the next section. So what that allows me to do is, in that 4 bar section, infinite loop until I'm ready, press the note, and then through we go. So that's kind of it, really. And I think, you know, we've moved on. So we've got there. I think it's been a great process. I really enjoyed doing this live stream, and you know, hopefully it's helped you see how to build a really great live looping performance that's similar to that which Elise Trouw uses. We've looked at, let's go back to the things we've seen. We've looked at, we've looked at inputs, we've looked at outputs, we've looked at chains, triggers, automations, cue and vamping, and I've hoped you found something interesting or useful to use in your own projects. I think you can hopefully see that Ableton is a really kind of easy to use piece of software that's good. I've got one final thing to talk you through, and I think it's useful. If we now click back into the this slide here, if you have multiple instruments, one of the most important things you need to do is you know, be really organized. And I think, you know, I'm pretty sure there's something that Elise Trouw must do, but it's certainly something that I've done. Write down what channels you want to use things for. So for example, if you look at my setup, I've held MIDI channel 1 free for IAC, even though I don't use it that much anymore. Keyboard 1 is channel 2, keyboard 2 is channel 3, BOM is on 8, my electronic drums are on 10. And I've also written down, I've got a vocal mic on 1 on the right hand side, on audio input 1. My electric guitar goes into 2, channel 2, acoustic guitar's on 3, and then my acoustic drums are 4 to 8. And then I've also got the note down there of my outputs. Performance is 1 and 2, and cue mix is 3 and 4. That's really helpful. Writing it down means that basically, if you're ever trying to think which one do I need to turn up or turn down, you've got your reference document. So that's something I have on my wall. We're not quite done though. You also probably need to think about having some reference information. So if you look at this, I think if I can, there it is, now wrong place. So I think also write down what MIDI channel and MIDI CC and MIDI notes you're using for things. So for example, here you can see that I've got start and stop on the looper is C6 and D6. Previous locator and next locator is D6 and D sharp 6. So that's really useful. And we're still not done. This is my final reference document that I've got. So actually you can see that I've mapped to the vocals, keyboards, guitar, bass and drums, all these different things per track. So for example, if I want to change the level of the vocals, that's MIDI CC 11 on channel 8. If I want to change the panning on vocals, it's CC 12. Effects chain is CC 13. What that basically means you can do is you've always got somewhere where you can immediately look. And so when you're in Ableton and you're kind of starting a new clip and you're saying, okay, I now need to change the envelope, one of these envelopes, and I want to change the sound of the volume of the track. Which one do I need to use? Or is it 21 or is it 30? Which one of these is it? Well, you've got yourself your track there. And like you can see there, looper 1, I've also written down all the different notes that I map to the looper. So again, if I come back to Ableton and we click back in on the looper, all these different buttons I've mapped, and I've written it all down in here. This actually goes down 2 more, kind of another whole page, because I've got looper 2 and looper 3 for every single page. So hopefully that's useful. You can see that you've got to be really organized and have yourself set up. And make sure you write it down, print it off, and it's always a reference document. So I hope you found that useful. Don't forget the BOM offer code. Let me just quickly go back to there. Where are we? The BOM offer code somewhere here. That's it. So you can go to BOM, check it out. It's an amazing piece of software. I absolutely love it. If it helps you and you fancy buying it, please do think about using the offer code Oliver20. That really helps me support the channel. And ultimately, that is it. We are done for the live stream. You can now use the techniques I've shown you to hopefully implement a system that will allow you to do hands-free looping. It takes a lot of work to do, but hopefully all the, using the system, the 8-point system I showed you, will be hopefully easy to implement. You can come back and watch this anytime, and I will probably do some shorter, more punchy videos for each of the sections to really help us line it up. Anyway, thanks for being here. See you again soon. Bye.